Okay, traders, now that you have your trading edge, your mechanical trading plan, you've got a pre and post trading process to ensure that you're doing what you can in that moment to have the proper structure around execution so that you're trying to stick to your trading plan. Now that we've got the structures and the processes in place, it's time to talk specifically about the psychology. And really, this is what this series is all about. The Trading Psychology Mastery series is about helping you master your trading psychology so that now that you have your trading edge, you can stick to it. And in this particular episode, I'm going to give you an overview of the human psychology, quite an advanced overview of the human psychology. And then in the preceding videos, we're going to go through each of the specific trading psychology challenges like overtrading, FOMO, fear, greed, etc., etc. But we're going to be referring back to the overarching principles that we talk about in this video. So this is more of an overarching general topic, and then the next preceding videos are going to be very granular and very, very specific. Okay? If you're finding this series useful and you're getting value from it, please copy the Trading Psychology Mastery Series playlist link that's in the description and share it with your trading community. And if you haven't already, do the Trading Psychology Archetype quiz. This is a completely free quiz that I created to help each and every single one of you figure out what trading mindset you have and to help you get to consistent profitability with a free personalized report at the end of that. Okay, let's get into it. Now, one of the most important concepts when we talk about psychology and your trading psychology is this concept between, or this idea of survival versus thrival. And there's effectively, if we're going to generalize and give some analogies and some simplified explanations for the human psychology, one of the important concepts to cover is thrival versus survival. Now, your human brain is very, very vast. It's very complicated. So a lot of the teaching we're going to give in this video are going to be summaries of that and analogies just to help paint a picture. Okay? Now, a concept that is important to understand is this idea of the human brain, especially the amygdala, the survival part of your brain. So let's draw a human brain here as best we can. And you have what we can summarize as two major components to your brain. You've got the amygdala and you've also got the prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is what's responsible for successful trading and being in this thrival state. Your amygdala is what's responsible for being highly emotional, and it's more of a survival state. So we've got thrival and we've got survival. Okay? Now, your amygdala is necessary. All parts of your brain and all parts of your body are necessary, otherwise you wouldn't have them. They all play a certain role. But when we talk specifically about being a successful trader, what's important up to this point is sticking to your process and sticking to your trading plan. Now, I want to make a statement here that what's going to help you stick to your trading plan and processes and what's going to help you make objective decisions as a trader is activating the prefrontal cortex and managing and quieting down the amygdala. If we talk about specifically helping you stick to your trading plan, that's what we want to do. We want to quiet down the survival part of your brain and activate the thrival part of your brain. Now, some people might ask, is that not dangerous? Why would we want to do that? The truth is, when you're sitting at a computer in front of your charts, you're using proper risk management, your survival part of your brain, the amygdala, was responsible for keeping you alive in life-threatening situations. When you're at your charts, when you're trading, the likelihood of a life-threatening situation in that moment is almost zero. So therefore, it's important to be able to manage and quiet down that outdated, hardwired response in order to put the more advanced part of your brain in charge, the prefrontal cortex. Now, every single one of you would have experienced throughout your journey the feeling of the different parts of your brain. One is more emotional, one's more overwhelmed, one's more, you get red hot and you get emotional and you act out of this impulse or instinct behavior, whereas all of you would have experienced that more inflow state and that feeling of effortlessness when you see a trade that aligns with your trading plan. You're in a very poised, balanced state of mind and you just execute with reasonable risk. And in that moment, you feel as if you did what was right in that moment, what was process-based. That is probably an indication that your prefrontal cortex was more in charge in that moment as opposed to the first example where your amygdala was more in charge. So every single one of you have probably experienced that feeling. It's now just about how can we put processes and strategies in place to manage and mitigate this. Now, we've already done quite a bit of that when we talk about identifying an edge, going process-based, putting that edge into a trading plan, having a pre and post trading execution process. A lot of that process has already been established, but when we talk about the specifics in later videos, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay? Now, part of the survival response as a human being is, if we're going to summarize this, your brain sees either, this is the survival response, your brain either sees threat in the form of a prey, something that, if we think about where this was useful thousands of years ago when our ancestors were without the infrastructures we have now. They're out in the wild, they were hunting, and they either saw a prey, a threat, which they perceived as negative, as bad, as challenging, as a potential loss, or they had, this is meant to be predator. So this is a threat, a predator, or something that they could consume, something like food or dinner, let's call it dinner, and that was prey. So there was very much two responses that our ancestors had for their survival. One was a threat response. It was a predator, a potential loss, potential death through being eaten by a predator. Or they had dinner, prey, something they wanted to capture and consume, something they wanted to gain. Why? Because if they didn't gain that, they would die eventually out of starvation. So really the survival response, the predator-prey response, the threat and the dinner response, if you want to call it that, come from the avoidance of death. That's what the survival response is. Now, it seems extreme, but this was necessary thousands of years ago. Of course, nowadays, we don't typically have, if you're watching this, if you're in quite a safe environment, if you have internet connection, chances are you don't have life-threatening threats all the time like our ancestors faced. And chances are you have very easy access to food for the most part. You go to the shops, you can buy food. So these threats that our ancestors were faced, typically we don't face nowadays. But we still have that same hardwired survival response programmed in our brain, in the amygdala, because human nature never gets rid of old things. It just builds new layers on top of. So we have to learn to manage this, okay? So the survival response looked like this. Our ancestors saw a threat, maybe a tiger in front of them, and they labeled that dangerous, bad, predator. I'm going to lose. This is potential death. And they had a response which was referred to, or what is referred to now. They had what is called confirmation bias in that moment. Put that here. Where in that moment, they exaggerated and accentuated how bad that threat was, and they ran the story in their mind of that would be a very painful and unpleasant death. This is everything I would lose. And the reason we had this survival response was to get an increase in cortisol and adrenaline pumping through the body, so that ancestor that was faced with a life-threatening situation was now primed with adrenaline pumping in their body, and the blood and the glucose and all the oxygen in the body would go from the internal organs to your muscles, and you'd be primed for what is referred to as a fight or flight response. So the human body has developed this response in order to keep them alive from life-threatening threats in that moment. So if they perceive themselves in that moment to be strong enough to fight the threat, they would. Otherwise, they would fight the threat. They would run away. So, and I'm sure every single one of you have experienced this in the market where you've experienced a loss and you recognize that same response, an increase in cortisol, an increase in adrenaline. You feel yourself literally getting red hot and you feel a physiological change in your body. That is because of this hardwired survival response. Your brain is literally seeing that loss as your ancestor would have seen a saber-toothed tiger. It can't differentiate between the two. It's seeing threat and it's responding in said manner. Increase in cortisol, increase in adrenaline, fight or flight, autonomic response. Okay? All right, hope that makes sense. So as a trader, we need to learn how to manage this survival response. Otherwise, we're going to be trading, and by the way, this this whole response is promoting fear. And because of the increase in cortisol and adrenaline, what tends to happen is your objective measures tend to shut down. Rational thinking shuts down. You exaggerate how bad this threat is, and you react to your external stimulus by avoiding the threat, running away from the threat out of fear. Okay? Now, let's translate this into trading for a second. Does that sound like what a professional trader would do? Does that sound like a way to build consistent profitability? And the answer is no. What's going to happen is if you have that same response firing because you haven't learned to manage a survival response and this fear response kicks in, you're going to go away from your trading plan and you're going to react in the market based on a fear response, and you're going to trade irrationally out of emotion. This could probably explain some erratic behavior that you later look back on in your trading, and you ask yourself the question, why on earth did I do that? Why did I react in that way? That it has nothing to do with my trading plan. The reason you reacted that way was because your brain was challenged in that moment, perceived the markets as a threat, that loss as a threat, and it reacted out of a survival response with adrenaline and cortisol and a fear response to do what it thought it would do to keep itself safe in that moment. Okay? Now, the same thing can happen in reverse. If you have this greed response, you see potential, profit to be made, then what's going to happen is your brain's going to have that same confirmation bias response to block out anything that runs counter to the belief, to accentuate and exaggerate how good the profit's going to be. And again, it increases cortisol and adrenaline, goes in that fight or flight response to be able to capture after that profit. This explains what is called impulsive trading, and this is what is referred to as instinctive trading, trying to avoid pain, trying to avoid loss, and this is trying to seek after pleasure, trying to seek after win. And remember, let's go back to the principles of what we're talking about in this series. A successful trader is one who is profitable at the end of a larger sample space. That sample space is a probability model of win, loss, loss, win, whatever sample space it is. So to be a profitable trader, by definition, over a large sample space, you have to both win and lose. You have to be able to lose as a trader. So if you're having this survival response of trying to avoid loss and seek after win, you're not going to be able to do what's necessary as a trader, which is stick to your trading plan and embrace both wins and losses in order to be consistently profitable. So the survival response here of avoiding the threat and the predator out of fear and seeking after the pleasure of winning out of greed is going to stop you from doing what is necessary, sticking to your trading plan, embracing both wins and losses. It's going to stop you from what's necessary in order to achieve consistent profitability. So in order to achieve consistent profitability and stick to your trading plan and processes consistently, irrespective of wins and losses, a trader needs to learn how to manage and quiet down the survival response, the amygdala, and put the prefrontal cortex in charge. Because the prefrontal cortex is what is responsible for being more objective and sticking to your processes. It doesn't react to the external stimulus. It has a look internally, what's the most objective decision according to my plan and processes, and it sticks to that. So the amygdala, if we have win, positive, pleasure, this is the positive polarity, and you got the negative polarity, the loss, the pain. The amygdala, the one that's focused on the outcome, is outcome-based, focuses on trying to avoid the pain of losing and seek after the pleasure of winning. Okay? As this avoidance and trying to seek after the pleasure. Whereas the process-based trader transcends the polarities of both positive and negative. It's unencumbered by the outcome of a trade, doesn't care if it's a loss or a win. It focuses on executing on the processes, the prefrontal cortex, the objective and rational part of your brain. And by the way, because trading is because trading requires both winning and losing, if you have an unrealistic expectation out of the amygdala to avoid loss and seek only after wins, what's going to happen is you're going to keep yourself stuck in the boom and bust cycle. So the boom and bust cycle is a symptom of being in outcome-based trading because you haven't learned to manage your amygdala. Because what's going to happen when you go boom and bust is you're going to be thinking that you can win all the time and you're going to be trying to avoid losing. And when the inevitable loss comes around, you're going to experience the pain of that and you're going to get stuck in a cycle. So down here, outcome-based thinking is cyclical. This is why a lot of traders who are in outcome-based thinking get stuck with break-even results, because they have unrealistic expectations on each individual trade, trying to seek a win. And then when the inevitable loss comes around, they ask themselves, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my trading? And they try and change things. They go to a new strategy. They try and change their strategy. Whereas a process-based trader doesn't care about the outcome. They just focus on consistently executing on their process, irrespective of win and loss. And over a long period of time, they achieve consistent profitability. They approximate their edge. Okay, so in summary, a big part of trading psychology is learning to manage your amygdala, quiet down its survival response, which is frankly a little bit outdated for if we want to thrive as a trader. You know, if you're about to get hit by a car or a train and that's about to hit you, then the survival response is necessary. It gets you out of that situation very quickly and very swiftly. But the likelihood of being in that situation day to day is very, very low. Especially when you're sitting at your charts with proper risk management, you're not going to get hit by a car. Okay, so being able to manage that response in that moment of taking the trade is very, very important. Now, you'll never be able to get rid of it. That's always going to be there to keep you alive when necessary. But when you're trading and you're about to make a decision, it's important to manage that and to put the prefrontal cortex in charge. So you'll see a lot of my work, every single one of the tools I teach in the 12-week program, all the work I do in one-on-one coaching, it has this effect of helping a trader manage and quiet down the amygdala and put the prefrontal cortex in charge. That's the overarching principle and the overarching idea. It's about transcending outcome-based thinking and going to process-based thinking. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's continue to elaborate on this. A trader is going to have a strong emotional reaction. And in the previous video, I talked about redefining what winning and losing mean to you. If you're programmed into thinking that winning is good, right, or you've had these experiences, then what you're doing in this moment, you have a positive emotion. What's happening in that moment is, let's think back to this reaction here, the survival reaction, is that you are consciously aware of the benefits in that moment because of confirmation bias. You're letting in the benefits and you're only seeing the benefits. You're reiterating the benefits. You're only letting in information that confirms that initial belief or bias or idea. But what's also happening is that you're unconsciously or unconscious to the drawbacks in that moment. And it's not difficult to see. These have been blocked out with disconfirmation bias. This is why a worthy exercise that I do with my students is help them see the other side of winning and help them redefine winning. When we go in there and ask what are the actual drawbacks to winning and what are the disservices, it's not difficult to see. You can see that when you win, you tend to become more complacent. You tend to stop doing the processes and the work that gets you there. You start to think you're a little bit invincible and puff yourself up. And you start talking down to the market, projecting ideas onto the market. You start to minimize the risk in the market, okay? And you stop doing the work, you stop learning and growing, and you stop being so teachable and open. And one of the consequences of winning, if you're infatuated with that and you see winning as some glorious achievement as a trader, is you become too focused on the individual trade and then you neglect the very process that's going to help you become consistently profitable over a long period of time. True winning as a trader is sticking to your process. This is true winning. False winning is winning the individual trade. True winning is over a large sample space. False winning is over an individual trade. Okay? So you're going to have a positive emotion with a win if you're fixated on the benefits of that win and you continue to run the story about how good that individual trade was and that win was. This is why in the previous video, what I suggested you do is you learn to ground yourself and you have a process in place to remind yourself of, all right, I may have taken a win on this individual trade, but you remind yourself of some of the risks and some of the drawbacks and what happened last time when you went on a winning streak. And you remind yourself of some of the things you've overlooked, not to beat yourself up, not to not to get yourself into a state of shame, but to humble yourself a little bit and get back to a state of equilibrium. Because the issue with being so puffed up in this positive state of emotion when you win in the state of pride is that you're then going to project onto the market. One of the symptoms of pride is narcissistic projection onto the market. You're going to force your ideas thinking that you know better than the market, and you're going to minimize the risk in the market. So it's important to start to become aware of the drawbacks and to humble yourself a little bit. And so too, if you're seeing a loss as bad and you're negative, you have a negative emotion over that, then what's happening is you're consciously aware of the drawbacks and you're reiterating the drawbacks with confirmation bias, and you're unconsciously aware or unconscious to the benefits in that moment. So what's important when you take a loss rather, in this state of shame, is you remind yourself of some of the things you've done well to bring yourself back to that state of equilibrium. And you remind yourself, you know what, you're not all that bad, and how much progress you've made, and you have ways to bring yourself back to this equilibrium state. The best traders I know, without a doubt, what they're doing is they're self-equilibrating. They're bringing themselves back to a more balanced state with quality questions, whereas some of the not so good traders, they're exaggerating their emotions and running their story about how good that win was or how bad that loss was on that individual trade, and they're accentuating their emotions, they're exaggerating their emotions, they're running their story, that survival response I was talking about, with confirmation bias, and they then require the market to humble them because they can't humble themselves. They get into such a big state of pride, they start posting on social media about how good they are, they start showing off their profits, and then lo and behold, they go on a string of losses and they get humbled by the market because they haven't learned to humble themselves. The traders who know how to humble themselves, they go back to their process, and they get out the boom and bust cycle, and they just consistently execute. Those are the very successful traders. Okay? Traders that take losses, they know what to do to get themselves back to that state of equilibrium. I teach a process in a 12-week program to help my traders get back to that state of equilibrium. Okay? So that they can quickly, and is it going to happen straight away? Are you going to learn to completely be unemotional? No, absolutely not. You're always going to have that initial sting and that initial pride and shame. But the best traders, they have processes to more quickly get themselves back to that state of equilibrium. They have good processes and they get very quick at getting back to that state of equilibrium. It's just like a muscle. You train it over and over and over, and you realize, all right, I'm at a loss. You remind yourself of some of the good, some of the benefits, and you get yourself back. You get yourself back to a state of equilibrium. Or you take a win, okay? You remind yourself, you humble yourself, you have a good chuckle over that, and you get yourself back to a state of equilibrium. And in a state, these traders are very, very good at getting themselves back to this state here, because that's the state where you're going to be process-based. You're going to have your prefrontal cortex activated. You're going to be more in that state of thrival, right, over here. Right? Thrival, process, and you're going to get back to your edge, sticking to your trading plan. Okay. Now, just to put wins and losses in perspective, some traders get so elated when they take a win in the market, right? They see it as such a good positive thing. But what they don't realize is if you look at the larger sample space, that current win, present moment, if we go into the past, that current win may actually be making up for some losses in the past. That current big win may be compensating for some small losses in the past. Or that current big win, if you look into the future, may be compensating for some small losses in the future. So to get so riled up and so happy about a current win, when you put it in perspective and you put it in the larger sample space, you realize that, that current win isn't that that big of a deal. I had some losses last month that it's compensating for. I may have some losses in later in this month that it's compensating for. And you need to learn to have this broader perspective. But you can't have this broader perspective if you're so caught up in the outcome of that individual trade with confirmation bias. And so too, you can have a current loss, and you may exaggerate that loss because of that survival response, and exaggerate and accentuate how bad it is. But if you put that on that timeline again, future, past, that current loss may be just compensating for a big win in the past or a big win in the future. So this is where a broader perspective is very, very important. And you can't have a broader perspective if you're so caught up in your emotion. Your emotions, by definition, are because you have incomplete awareness or incomplete information or a narrow perspective. So the more you broaden your perspective, the less emotional you're going to be. And the more likely you are to get into the prefrontal cortex and quiet down the amygdala. The amygdala, by definition, is a narrow perspective because of confirmation bias. It has to narrow its perspective and exaggerate and accentuate how bad it is in order to have that survival response, the cortisol and adrenaline go through the roof. So you go in that fight or flight response. So a lot of the work I teach and do with clients in the 12-week program, you'll see a lot of it is helping you broaden your perspective, because the broader the perspective, the less emotional you are. Okay? So we talked about today the survival versus the thrival response. We talked a little bit about the biochemistry, how your brain's physically made up and the responses it has, right? The prefrontal cortex versus the amygdala. We talked about the survival response that was necessary thousands of years ago. In some very rare circumstances, it's still necessary today. It will still work, don't worry. You're never going to shut it off. It's not possible to shut it off. But when you're trading at the markets, you have to learn how to manage it and quiet it down. It's helping you transition from outcome-based to process-based. And we talked about emotions, how they are a subset of that survival response and what role they play in the markets. Now, it's also worthy to note that when we talk about the boom and bust cycle, like we spoke about in the previous video, the boom and bust cycle really starts when you experience a win, you go into this state of pride, and you puff yourself up into this state of self-exaggeration. That's really where the boom and bust cycle starts. And when you get very happy and very proud, and it's very common that I get messages from traders who say, I've had a very, very successful week. I've done very, very well this week. I'm very happy with that. Very positive. I had great wins. I'm very puffed up. And then guess what? The next week, it's a terrible week. I took a lot of losses. It's negative. It's bad. And then the next week, I had a really good week. Very, very good. Very positive. Happy, proud, winning, good. And then next week, I had a very bad week. Very negative, very painful, very sad, very depressed. And I just want to show these traders really that, if you got very good at when you were having a good week, you learned to humble yourself a little bit, as opposed to letting the market humble you the next week. You just learned to humble yourself, bring yourself back to a state of equilibrium. Or when you're having a so-called very bad week, you learn how to bring yourself back to a state of equilibrium. And you got very good at understanding your brain, the survival response, your emotions, your awareness in that moment, and how your awareness is leading to your emotions. And you had good questions, and you had a broader perspective, and you learnt to just manage this response a little bit better. And you wouldn't oscillate as much, and you'd be less emotional, and you'd stick to your trading plan more, and you'd be putting less energy into your trading. You'd be getting better results. So this work is very, very important, very profound if you implement it properly. Okay, traders, I think I've given a broad general overview of your human psychology and the amygdala response, the survival response versus the prefrontal cortex thrival response, and your emotions and fear and greed and how they impact your trading. Now, what we're going to do in the preceding videos is talk about each of the minute specific ideas or specific challenges that may be impacting your trading performance, like overtrading, FOMO, or the boom or bust cycle, all that type of stuff. And we're going to be tying it back to these principles we've talked about today and in the preceding videos. And my hope by the end of this series is you're going to have a very broad perspective on trading psychology. You're going to know how to manage some of the situations you've been put in, and it's going to help you make more money as a trader. Okay, if you found this video useful, please share it with your trading community, share the playlist. And if you haven't already, make sure you do that trading psychology archetype quiz. That's going to give you an idea of what trading mindset you have, and it's going to show you how to get from where you currently are to consistently profitable. I give you a free report with that. Okay, thank you for watching to the end. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.